It lays the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather, and he who controls the weather will control the world.
Will rain and storms play a role in swing states on Election Day 2024? That's a new headline from AccuWeather. They continue. There will be some trouble spots in the United States for Election Day 2024 where weather disruptions and dangers may arise. AccuWeather forecasters say. Well, there you have it. Straight from the mouths of the script-reading climate engineering cover-up actors at AccuWeather. Next from the UK Independent, Election Day weather forecast is out and conditions could help determine who wins. End of headline. Next headline from the Weather Channel, Election Day weather rain possible in swing states. From the Economic Times, weather could play spoil sport in these swing states. Does the mass distraction election circus actually determine who's really pulling the levers of power from behind closed doors? Or, in the words of George Carlin, quote, if voting mattered, they wouldn't let us do it. This being said, anytime the controllers can mire populations in struggle and misery, it certainly serves their overall agendas and objectives. What has history taught us? Have we learned from it? Will we learn the necessary lessons before the clock runs out? Give me control of the economies of a country, and I care not who makes her laws. The few who understand the system will either be so interested from its profits or so dependent on its favors that there will be no opposition from that class. I believe that quote is attributed to Rockefeller, but does it matter? Anyone that's even slightly awake knows it's true. And let's add this to the quote. Keep the masses entertained with a constant carnival of bread and circus, and they will go along with almost anything, willingly, eyes wide shut, so long as the show goes on. Except that it won't. Not for much longer. Wait and see. This week from MSNBC, quote, millions of Americans are suffering with election anxiety, end quote. Yes, the facade of democracy. Far sooner than almost any dare to imagine, they'll be suffering from trying to survive another day anxiety. How is it possible that so few even now sense or see the oncoming train of total collapse, societal and environmental? Again, the human race, like the occupants of a car parked on a rail crossing with the oncoming train, lights flashing, horn blaring, and the occupants of this car continue to fight over what station to put the radio on. Spain just got hit with a year's worth of rain, North Carolina the same, and a few months ago, Dubai, with 2 years of rain within 6 hours. Was Dubai doubly uncooperative to the controllers that shouldn't be? Is that why it got hit with twice as much? I'll get to this in a moment. From Gizmodo Tech News, the billionaire plot to block out the sun. From that report, can thousands of pounds of sulfur dioxide pumped into the stratosphere reverse global warming? We may soon find out. What are they leaving out? They're leaving out the fact that over 75 years of other elements, much more toxic still, saturating the atmosphere. Lab test proven. Not speculation, not theory, not hypothesis. This report from Gizmodo continues. What was once a goofy plot from Highlander 2 and The Simpsons may one day come to pass. Think about how absurd that point is. When we have film footage of former U.S. President Lyndon Johnson 62 years ago, in 1962, stating on film on the record that we had the power to control the world's cloud layer then, and he who controls the weather controls the world, and yet they continue to try to paint this as, quote, a goofy plot from Highlander and The Simpsons. That's absurdity. That's criminal behavior from Matrix Media. And once this is all out in the open, and it will be soon enough, one way or the other, why shouldn't a justifiably enraged population hold those Matrix Media minions legally and morally accountable for their part in the climate engineering cover-up? Time will soon tell. So let's stop there with this Gizmodo report, though. One day come to pass, they say, about climate engineering. Does anyone look up from their electrical appendages to take note of what's going on in our skies, and has been, again, for decades? Filth-filled skies, blue skies no more. Completely off-the-rails weather, toxic fallout in our air and in the rain, impacting everything from forests to crops to us. The Gizmodo report continues, billionaire weirdos, their words not mine, in Silicon Valley are plotting to block out the sun. Why? ? We are running out of time to stop the rapid warming of the planet, and a radical problem may soon require radical solutions. Yes, having pushed us, from the frying pan into the fire. They continue, the planet is getting hotter and the disastrous effects of that warming are no longer theoretical. They are here now. Worse, they say, climate experts have warned that we may be well past the point of no return. Any action by the world's governments, the report says, to fix this problem would need to be immediate and dramatic, and that's probably not going to happen. No, it did happen over 75 years ago. Why would anyone think that those who actually hold the levers of power would ask for our permission first? Do they ask our permission to detonate 2,400 nuclear bombs that contaminated everything on the planet, including detonations in the atmosphere they thought would collapse the atmosphere, could collapse it? They did it anyway. Let's add this from SEAL, that's CIEL, that's the Center for International Environmental Law. Geoengineering research and experiments. Robust protections are needed, not voluntary framework principles. Again, over 75 years too late for that. How much longer can the elephant in the sky be hidden and or denied in plain sight, pun intended? And this from phys.org. Plans to cool the earth by blocking sunlight are gaining momentum, but critical voices risk being excluded. Well, who would have imagined that the criminal cabals masquerading as legitimate governments would do such a thing without public knowledge or consent? Right. Business as usual. Let's stand back and consider the oncoming train, unfolding extremely near existential threats that, short of a complete course correction, will very soon render all other causes and concerns moot points. Here's one that should be easy enough to feel in your skin and on surfaces, your car, for example, for any that are even slightly awake. No ozone layer, game over. For terrestrial life on Earth and most aquatic life. We are well on that road already. Here's the title of this published science report. Deadly ultraviolet UVC and UVB penetration to Earth's surface, human and environmental health implications. Again, published science study. Conclusion, the veracity of our data and data from other sources call into question the validity of atmospheric ozone models. They're completely fictitious to, again, mask the problem until the moment of impact. The report continues. Further, we call into question the simplistic supposition of the Montreal Protocol that chlorofluorohydrocarbons are the primary cause of ozone depletion, as we stated at geoengineeringwatch.org from day one, Climate Intervention Operations Corps. The science report then states, and point to the very heavy burden of halogens introduced into the atmosphere by ongoing jet-sprayed coal fly ash geoengineering. Word for word from the science report. We demonstrate that satellite-based LISIRD, that's an acronym, solar spectra irradiance at the top of the atmosphere is badly flawed, with some regions of the spectrum being less intense than that measured at Earth's surface. Think about that. Atmospheric readings high in the atmosphere, less intense than the readings on Earth's surface. The report then says that calls into question any calculations made by utilizing the LISIRD data. We provide introductory information on the devastating effects of UVB and UVC on humans, phytoplankton, been over that so many times in this broadcast, peer-reviewed studies from the Atlantic, plankton down 90%, a virtual crash, other oceans not far behind because plankton have to feed in the upper layers of the water column, they're being fried by the UV. And yes, there's lots of other problems with the oceans, I'm not denying that, I never ever have. It's not a this or that equation, it's all the above. But when this massive piece of the puzzle is omitted by the vast majority of so-called academia, that's a criminal act, criminal cover-up. Final statement in this report, that the UVC, UVB, not only killing phytoplankton, but coral, insects, and plants. Think about that. There's no question this is happening. Anybody that's, again, slightly awake can feel it. But how many people ignore their very senses, including their sense of sight? That what we can see in our skies is absolutely not just condensation. We have film footage to prove this at geoengineeringwatch.org. There's no debate, no discussion. not rationally. Film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning on and off. No, it's not jet exhaust, as so many seem to be so confused about. You don't put exhaust out of a retrofit nozzle mounted on the wing pylon aimed into the exhaust jet stream to make it look like exhaust. It's not exhaust, it's a spray dispersion. You can't put 40 to 60 million tons of aluminum nanoparticles through engines and expect those planes to fly long. This is a sprayed dispersion. And that figure I just cited came from work with the University of Minnesota, hundreds of lab tests, extrapolating the amount of material in that precipitation and projecting that globally on an annual basis. 40 to 60 million tons. Think about that. From theconversation.com, Earth's climate will keep changing long after humanity hits net zero emissions. First, we are not likely to hit net zero emissions. In fact, as the environment dies, more and more carbon is being emitted. And we already know this. I already covered this on a previous broadcast, that this shutdown of the planet's natural life support systems is so severe at this point that the emissions are going through the roof because there's no buffering of those emissions anymore. Forests have become carbon sources, not carbon sinks. Same is becoming true for the oceans because we're killing the planet's life support systems. And the single greatest factor, not the only factor, so many people misquote me on this. I'm simply stating the single biggest factor, climate engineering. But all forms of destructive human activity are a part of the problem, all need to be addressed. But we need to start with stopping this intentional intervention in the planet's last remaining life support systems. About hurricanes and cyclones, as they are called on the other side of the world, from AccuWeather, Typhoon Kongray to bring 180 mile per hour winds, 3 feet of rain to Taiwan. This has already made an impact. From AP News, Typhoon Kongray hits Taiwan's east coast, leaving hundreds injured. For the record, at absolute minimum, the patented technology to make or break even storms of this size has existed for decades. With all that in mind, this, new from AOL.com, hurricane season isn't over yet. What experts say about the, quote, active months to come. So, could there yet be more devastation scheduled in the near future? We'll soon enough find out. This is Dane Wigington. You're listening to the weekly installment of the commercial-free, non-political Global Alert News Report, the end of the world as we know it broadcast, the bad news broadcast, brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of global climate intervention operations, aka weather warfare. Again, this reminder, we must reach a critical mass of awareness. This is the only way forward in this fight. By starting a conversation on the climate engineering issue that leads people to a credible source of data, that's a very effective key to the door. Geoengineeringwatch.org will continue all of our efforts to be the go-to source on covert climate engineering operations. And a conversation on climate engineering can easily be started with Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials available on our homepage. Please help us to sound the alarm. More bad news breaking headlines from BBC. Alarm call as world's trees slide towards extinction. No trees, no people, just like the plankton. The report states scientists assessing dangers posed to the world's trees have revealed that more than a third of species are facing extinction in the wild. The number of threatened trees now outweighs all threatened birds, mammals, reptiles, and amphibians put together, according to the latest update of the official Extinction Red List. The report then says more than 1,000 scientists took part in the assessment of the conservation status of trees. Trees are highly threatened all across the world, but now we have the tools that we need to make sure that we prioritize conservation action on the ground. Let's put this into perspective. How many trees have we lost since the dawn of so-called civilization? 2/3. 2/3 of the trees that existed then are now gone. The other third is dead, dying, and burning. Where does that leave us? Is that dire a conclusion woven into this report? No, never. Because they want to keep populations asleep at the wheel until the moment of impact. Everybody thinking, well, it's a little bit out in the future still, so I'm not going to worry about it today. More on that later in this broadcast. From the UK Guardian, there is no money. Cuba fears total collapse amid grid failure and financial crisis. From that report, repeated blackouts leave residents concerned about the food, water supply of Cuba's future. This is a snapshot of what's coming for us all. Cuba's government has spent the last days attempting to get the island's national grid functioning after repeated Island-wide blackouts without power. Sleep becomes difficult in the heat, food spoils, and water supplies fail. The effort to save power didn't save the system, and a day later, the island went dark. The government acknowledges the perilous state of its system, blaming the 62-year-old trade embargo imposed by the United States. A collapse of the regime would be a, quote, humanitarian disaster, spurring more immigration, a tsunami of it, for far larger than we have seen so far. A breakdown of social order could unleash a surge of criminal violence. No could, no may, no might. Haiti, now Cuba, about 36 other countries right behind them. And again, those countries who either have resources that the empire wants or who don't cooperate with the dictates of empire soon find catastrophic consequences in their lap. That's how it works. From BirdLife International, press release, new report reveals plummeting migratory shorebird populations globally. Let's clarify this headline. All birds, everywhere. The turkeys that used to be everywhere where I live in the forest, there's none now. There's none. We don't hear anything about this while we're watching scripted political theater day in and day out. Nothing. In years past, when I would trek far into the forest and the trailless wilderness and sleep there, I couldn't sleep past first light because there were so many birds. It sounded like I was in the tiki room at Disneyland. All sorts of singing birds. It was so joyous to awaken to them, and now it's deathly silent, deafeningly silent. Please bear with me through some varied headlines. I'm trying to give an overall snapshot of the wider horizon. From the Washington Post, planet warming pollution is growing at the fastest rate in history, scientists say. Most of the growth comes from people burning coal, oil, and gas, the report said. Pay no attention. We're talking about atmospheric particle pollution. Pay no attention to the geoengineering jets spewing out literally tens of millions of tons of the most toxic and damaging atmospheric aerosol pollution of all. But we're not allowed to even mention that, let alone deal with it. Here's a reminder of this recent CBS report. Race to save fertile land as soil degradation threatens global food supply. We're losing 4 football fields of soil a second. And about the heating I just covered, the current rate of thermal energy buildup on the planet is equal to the energy contained in 13 Hiroshima bombs per second. About 10 years ago, it was 4, then it went to 7, then 9, then 12, now it's 13. The thermal energy buildup on the surface will become ever more apparent in the weeks and months to come, and no amount of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding to create short-term toxic surface cooldowns will stop it. Every one of those cooldowns comes at the cost of an even worse overall warming. And about the loss of soils, the loss of pollinators and insects are completely connected to this equation. Bees, aluminum. This is on top of unprecedented droughts and deluges also decimating global food production. The walls are closing in at blinding speed from countless directions. Next, from AccuWeather. Japan's iconic Mount Fuji has yet to see snow this winter, breaking a 130-year-old record. From that report, Japan recorded its hottest summer on record this year since statistics began in 1898, the meteorological agency said, while it's snowing in Arizona. Well, it snowed in California in the middle of August and September again because of chemical ice nucleation operations. Why is geoengineeringwatch.org the only source that is trying to bring that core component of climate engineering to light? But again, wait, what about this new headline from SFGate? Winter is here. Snow falls on Hawaii's tallest peaks. The mere idea, the report says, of snow on a tropical island feels dramatic and exciting, and certainly distracting for those who don't want to believe there's anything wrong with the planet. The Mauna Kea Visitor Information Center, I hope I got that right, posted snowy images on Sunday that looked as if they could have been taken in Alaska. That's the type of sensationalized report. Here's another. This is from AccuWeather. Snow in Hawaii. Winter arrives before Halloween! Exclamation point. What about, we had a satellite picture of a stripe of snow across flat Kansas. A stripe of snow 10 miles wide and 300 miles long. Is that nature? I think not. That is certainly chemical ice nucleation. That was the aircraft dumping its load of chemical ice nucleating material over atmospheric moisture and creating literally a stripe of snow 300 miles long. See the engineering winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. Please learn about that core component of climate engineering. From USA Today, Report raises alarm about increasing danger killing thousands yearly. They say climate change is killing Americans in surprising ways. And then they focus on the waste created by healthcare as a part of the problem. No mention of climate engineering filling the atmosphere with incredibly inflammatory and toxic fallout, synergistic toxicity between many of these elements, and we don't even know the full range of elements being dispersed. But they say that the health harms created by climate change, again, no mention of climate engineering, stack up to being the same order of magnitude as the harms associated with medical errors. Again, this is from USA Today, and they repeat, preventable medical errors kill 250,000 Americans each year. And they cite a study by Johns Hopkins University to prove that. That's just what we know about. And in regard to the effect of what we're breathing that's not being acknowledged by any official agency, no air quality testing tests for nanoparticles, it all goes under the radar by design, not an accident. From the UK Daily Mail, autism nearly tripled in kids and young adults in the last decade, as researchers explain why. Autism in children and young adults in America has surged in the last decade. Data shows they relate this to environmental pollution. Look up, connect the dots. Not saying there's not many forms of pollution, but when you have a specific form that we know is toxic, we have idea of the quantities, and the contamination is ubiquitous all over the planet by design, it is an absolute crime for every single individual that participates in the cover-up of what's going on in our skies. From AP News, where has all the rain gone? Question mark. Bone dry October strikes much of the U.S. From that report, a bone dry October is pushing nearly half of the United States into a flash drought. We hear that term a lot now, don't we? Just like a week before Lahaina. That's exactly what it was officially declared, leading to fires in the Midwest and hindering shipping on the Mississippi River. For those that don't know, climate intervention operations are far more effective at inducing drought than even inducing deluge. Both effective, but far more drought. Too many condensation nuclei. The droplets don't combine and fall as rain, so you have days and days of featureless, rainless skies, bone dry underneath. That's not nature. It's not natural. Next, from AccuWeather, every state in the U.S. is experiencing abnormally dry conditions, including Alaska, Hawaii, except for the snow on top of Hawaii to make those sensationalized headlines, and Puerto Rico. That country being in the news a lot of late, aren't they? With most of the country in moderate to extreme drought. Atmospheric loading of climate engineering nanoparticles and chemical ice nucleation elements is drying up much or most of the precipitation that would otherwise have fallen. Now, most scheduled weather so-called forecasters call for a percentage chance of rain. No matter how much moisture is migrating overhead, so-called storms are very different than they were historically. This is true in many ways and in many directions. In Northern California, so often days, again, a featureless cloud canopy, often bone dry underneath, and at the scheduled times, aka forecast times, drizzle begins. Often there's a faint but distinct unnatural odor, a slight chemical-like smell, nothing like what life-giving rain should be or was for time immemorial. And then there's the leaves on deciduous trees that after specific fall rains, heavily seeded rains, the leaves just die, stone dead, but still hanging on the trees, sometimes all winter, if they're in a sheltered location and the wind doesn't blow them off. And if you think this is just nature, think again. Geoengineeringwatch.org has done extensive rain testing to determine exactly what is in the rain that's causing this unnatural scenario. You won't like what we found. More on this coming soon. Natural weather is no more. The damage done can't be undone in any time frame that matters. What may yet be accomplished, if and only if enough summon the courage to face the gathering storm of insanity head on, is to stop the ongoing damage from countless forms of human activity, with weather warfare at the top of the list. And if, again, by our collective efforts, we can accomplish this, we may yet have a chance of salvaging some portion of the planet's remaining life support systems. From IFL Science, atmospheric rivers have shifted towards Earth's poles, bringing big changes to weather. No mention, of course, of ionosphere heaters that create atmospheric pressure zones that affect atmospheric wind flow, jet streams, core to this equation. No mention. Not allowed. Just conspiracy theory, they say. And forget about President Johnson 62 years ago stating we had the power to do all of this then. It seems there's a new schedule weather script from the climate engineers. And before I read the new AccuWeather headline, consider and remember how many times on this broadcast over and over how many years that I've stated on the record that drought to deluge scenarios were the hallmark of climate intervention operations. Here's the headline. Drought to downpours. Rain could trigger flooding in central U.S. Report says heavy rain and thunderstorms will soon blossom across parts of the central United States, raising the flood risk in areas facing drought conditions. Coming straight out of the record-warm Gulf of Mexico, which they will likely soon turn into snowstorms as we progress into the winter season. Snowstorms out of the record-warm Gulf of Mexico, just like last year and the year before, and no so-called meteorologist questions this. 80 degrees to rain, back to 80 degrees, and back and forth again. And we pretend it's normal. How many are pretending it's normal? Because this is just too horrible to face. If we don't face it, what's coming will be far more horrible. From two very dedicated anti-climate engineering activists in Washington State, this is Kathy and Larry. I'll leave it at that. They are two dear and trusted friends and fellow fighters in this battle. This message from this week. Weather chaos here in Southwest Washington. After 6 months of hot, dry days, no rain. October 26, a mile from our home, two fire engines attended, spreads up the trees, wildfire right down their street. The next day, scheduled rain for several days. The stated nighttime low of 33 degrees instead falls to 18 degrees. Again, the following night, after a full day of heavy rain, the scheduled nighttime low temperature of 34 degrees falls to 21 degrees with a surprise flash freeze. How does this happen, they ask? Question mark. Forest fire to heavy rain to flash freeze with a 14-plus degree mishap in the stated nighttime low, all in a 5-day period? Question mark. This is a hallmark scenario of climate intervention operations and chemical ice nucleation for weather modification. Please review the engineering winter section on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. We had every major media source covered the Chinese government doing this, but if you bring it up here, suddenly you're immediately labeled as a conspiracy theorist. How bad will it have to get, this planetary Truman Show, before people wake up and are willing to face what's unfolding? From the New York Times, a month's worth of rain falls in a single day in parts of Spain. Here's a conflicting headline, not just a month's worth of rain, but according to Reuters News, a year's worth of rain in a day. Here's the headline, Spanish floods kill 95 as year of rain falls in a day in Valencia. From NBC News, Spain gets a year's worth of rain in just one day. They corroborate that. From AP News, Spain searches for bodies. This is a later report. Unprecedented flooding occurs, claims at least 158 lives. They say greenhouses and farms across southern Spain, known as Europe's garden for its exported produce, were also ruined by heavy rains and flooding. The storms spawned a freak tornado in Valencia and a hailstorm, chemical ice nucleation. Think about that. That's where the massive hailstones are coming from, that punched holes in cars. Think about that. Let's do a slight rewind as a reminder. Only a few months ago from Fox News, Dubai floods after city gets 2 years of rain in one day. From the same event, this headline from ABC News, Dubai sees severe flooding after getting 2 years worth of rain in 24 hours. And another from Forbes, historic floods in Dubai as year or two of rain falls. I could go on, but you get the point. Here's my question. Is it just an amazing coincidence that both Spain and Dubai were not okay with the actions of a particular country that I won't mention, a country that seems often to be the tail wagging the dog of this country, the U.S., and both Spain and Dubai were pushing back? Anyway, again, just a coincidence, I'm sure. Almost forgot to mention, Dubai also announced it would be dumping the U.S. dollar just before being hit with 2 years of rain in a day. So 2 violations on the part of Dubai. Perhaps that justifies 2 years of rain in a day instead of just 1 year's worth. You decide. And let's not forget recent headlines like this. Apocalyptic storm leaves North Carolina looking like a war zone. That's from the Asheville Daily Planet. Can't have those stubborn, pesky local landowners getting in the way of almost overdue DoD lithium contracts, can we? And never forget, in any and every weather catastrophe event that doesn't seem natural because it isn't, remember and consider that there are always many agendas and objectives for the manipulators of the matrix, not just this or that, but this and that, and much more. So many layers. Keep that in mind. So with all the devastating deluges in very strategic key locations, what about this recent report? Rewind to January of this year from INCAR, that's the National Center for Atmospheric Research. Climate change isn't producing expected increase in atmospheric moisture over dry regions. Well, this new discovery definitely didn't seem to apply to Spain and Dubai, did it? The National Center for Atmospheric Research report continues. Arid and semi-arid areas may face especially high risks of extreme heat and fire. Certainly Spain got plenty of both, heat and fire. About Dubai, luckily for them, sand doesn't burn so well, though they did recently suffer heat index temperatures, aka feels like temperatures, pushing 160 degrees. Yeah, sounds like a great place for a vacation. More from the INCAR report. The laws of thermodynamics dictate a warmer atmosphere can hold more water vapor. Been over that so many times in this broadcast, but new research has found that atmospheric moisture has not increased as expected over arid and semi-arid regions of the world as the climate has warmed. Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? Can anyone say geoengineering? The not allowed to mention giant piece of the puzzle? Let's keep going. More from INCAR. The findings are particularly puzzling, they say, because climate models have been predicting that the atmosphere will become more moist even over dry regions. If the atmosphere is drier than anticipated, arid and semi-dry regions may be even more vulnerable to future wildfires and extreme heat than predicted. They continue. The U.S. National Science Foundation and the Center for Atmospheric Research are, quote, uncertain what's causing the discrepancy. They say this is a global problem and it's something that is completely unexpected. Yes, yet again, they just can't figure it out. No idea. They're, quote, uncertain. What a surprise. There's more. The authors say follow-up research is needed to determine why water vapor is not increasing over these regions. The reasons could have to do with moisture not moving from Earth's surface into the atmosphere as projected or circulating around the atmosphere in, quote, unanticipated ways. It's also possible, they say, that an entirely different mechanism could be responsible. Let's repeat that. Quote, it's possible that an entirely different mechanism could be responsible. Wow, I wonder what that possibly could be. The National Center for Atmospheric Research report then says, adding to the mystery, the new study showed that while water vapor is increasing over humid regions of the world, it is not rising as expected during the most arid months of the year. Think Amazon, 75,000 fires this year alone. The study appeared in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They say a basic rule of climate science is that the atmosphere can hold more moisture as it warms, 7% for every degree C. By the way, I've been over that many times. And it's the reason climate models consistently project that atmospheric water vapor will increase as the planet becomes warmer. Must rain more on a rapidly warming planet unless there's a factor we're not being told about, aka climate engineering. Water vapor, they say, actually also declined over the southwest United States, which has been a long-term reduction in precipitation. They then say this is contrary to all climate model simulations in which it rises at a rate close to the theoretical expectations, even over dry regions, the authors wrote. Again, translation, something is wrong. Something is going on, and we have no idea what the hell it is. So much for the so-called experts, and for those that thought the water woes in the West were all better now, think again. The fun's just getting started. Just a bit more from this study. Let's keep going. The study noted that the situation is leading to an increase in vapor pressure deficit. Wait, stop. Where have I heard that term before? VPD, vapor pressure deficit. How many times over how many years have I sounded the alarm about that? And the experts are just now beginning to admit to it because they can't hide it anymore. About VPD, the report continues. VPD is the difference between the amount of moisture that the atmosphere can hold and the amount that that's actually in the air. When the deficit rises, it can act as a critical driver of firestorms and ecosystem stress. Again, a big portion of that stress being that everything from trees to crops shut their stomata, the respiratory ports. They don't breathe. They don't absorb carbon. They don't release oxygen. We're there now. The report continues, we could be facing even higher risks than what's been projected for arid and semi-arid regions like the Southwest, also Spain and Dubai, which has already been affected by unprecedented water shortages and extreme firestorms. Translation, it's only going to get worse. Unless, of course, these populations push back, like Spain and Dubai did, in which case they may all be in for some devastating deluges to go with their catastrophic droughts and firestorms. We absolutely need to figure out, the report says, what's going on, because the situation is not what we expected, they say, and it could have very serious implications for the future. You think? What could go wrong with spraying the skies all over the globe with highly toxic electrically conductive particles and then microwaving those particles to manipulate them? What could possibly go wrong? They end with this. Listen carefully. This is from the report. It is a really tricky problem to solve, they say, and they end with this. More research is needed to determine the cause. You can't make this up. This is a true planetary asylum. And this is coming from the so-called experts that apparently are either criminally negligent of the very field of study in which we're told they're experts, they're lying, or they're clinically blind. Again, how about all that? From the so-called climate scientists, aka climate engineering cover-up actors. What else aren't we being told? Let's rewind to this 2011 report from NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's about the doubling of atmospheric aerosols over a 10-year period, doubling, and they don't know where it's all coming from. They just can't figure it out. Here's from the report. Stratospheric aerosol increased surprisingly rapidly in this time, almost doubling during the decade. The reasons for the 10-year increase in stratospheric aerosols are not understood and are the subject of ongoing research. The team concluded that models miss an important cooling factor if they don't account for the influence of stratospheric aerosols, implying that this is actually cooling, or don't include recent changes in stratospheric aerosol levels. They say if stratospheric aerosol levels continue to increase, temperatures will not rise as quickly as they would otherwise. This is a covert selling of climate engineering. That's what it's about. So just for perspective, how well is it working? How well is it really cooling with all this atmospheric particulate loading? Here's a new report. This is from SciTech Daily. Earth's temperature could increase by 25 degrees. Startling new research reveals that CO2 has more impact than previously thought. Let's blame it all on CO2. Again, it is a problem. For those that don't think it's a problem, it's a problem. When you change atmospheric chemistry by 50% over the geologic blink of an eye, nothing's adapted to that. That has to have a cause and effect, and it triggers other things like methane release, radically powerful greenhouse gas. Let's add climate engineering particulates now. It's a this and that equation. Again, it's all the above. So please know what you're speaking about before you start to disseminate conclusions that aren't data-based. Please learn the science before you go in a direction that actually strains credibility of this critical cause. So, again, why aren't the heat-trapping atmospheric aerosols mentioned? From the report, analysis of Pacific Ocean sediments shows a doubling of atmospheric CO2 might raise Earth's temperature by up to 14 degrees, exceeding the IPCC, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, biggest scientific panel on anything ever, and they are there to mask this issue, period. And you have articles that are designed to pretend that loading the atmosphere with these aerosols is causing an overall cooling effect. It's not. It causes short-term, temporary, toxic surface cooling at the cost of an even worse warming, and we are seeing the results of that now. And about this article citing 25-degree temperature rise, no need to worry about that because we will be long gone way before that point. 3.5 C or 7 degrees Fahrenheit is enough to create functional extinction of our species, and we are way into that curve right now. From CNN, an unprecedented number of flood emergencies have ravaged the U.S., and it's a warning of what's to come. The report continues. The most intense rain events are getting heavier and more frequent as the world warms due to carbon fuel pollution. No mention of climate engineering. A warmer atmosphere is capable of soaking up more moisture like a sponge and wringing it out in the form of gushing rainfall. So what about the report covered earlier? And who gets this extreme rain? And who doesn't? And who gets to decide? I think that's becoming abundantly clear. Yes, devastating deluge is going to happen, much more. They warn, except where the exact opposite is happening. No rain for months and months, like Northern California, 6 months with no rain with 100 degrees temperatures. And the so-called experts just can't figure out why. Imagine that. And yes, I always have to bring this up, that the burning of over 100 million barrels of carbon fuel a day, burning of 26 million tons of coal a day, cutting down forests, paving the planet, poisoning the oceans, all of that is a massive part of the problem. But stack climate engineering on top of all that, and we don't have much time, period. It's an all-the-above equation. Please remember that. We've been horrible stewards of the planet, no rationally denying that. But there can be no legitimate discussion about climate anything from any perspective without first and foremost addressing and accounting for climate intervention operations. More headlines. In South Africa, water shortages are the new reality. This is manifesting all over the planet in so many regions. From AccuWeather, wildfire threat remains high in Northeast with temperatures set to soar next week. This is in between the whiplash chemical ice nucleation cool downs. They say bouts of blustery weather combined with record dryness will keep the risk of wildfires elevated through the end of the month. Building warmth may compound concerns in the week following. They say many high temperature records will fall. It's ongoing. In the coming weeks and months, much more than that will be falling. Buckle up. We're all in for a ride that few can yet imagine. Wait and see. You're listening to the weekly installment of Global Alert News, the Bad News Broadcast, installment number 482, November 2nd, 2024. This is Dane Wigington, your host. Global Alert News is brought to you by Geoengineeringwatch.org, the largest and most visited website in the world on the subject of climate intervention operations known as geoengineering. Recordings of this broadcast can be found on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org and in the Dane Wigington YouTube channel. I'm going to cut to the chase quickly here. I have so much more to cover. I'm going to try to get through as much of it as I can. Bottom line, please help us to share the dimming documentary from the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org. This helps us to bypass social media censorship. Please help us to circulate Geoengineering Watch awareness-raising materials that are an excellent an effective key to the door to start a conversation on this issue. Shirts, printed materials, and the printed materials we pass on at below our cost of producing and shipping. Our only goal to stop what's happening in our skies while there's still anything left to salvage. This is a team effort. It will take all of us to make this wheel roll forward. Please march with us in this fight. Make every single day count. Changing gears. From Fox News, Fox Weather, ghost forests are eerie remnants of coastal ecosystems. They say ghost forests emerge when coastal landscapes become inundated by sea level rise or flooding. And to those that are still clinging to the staggeringly false conclusion that there isn't anything wrong with the environment, I would only ask you to please consider such a conclusion and such a narrative is extremely discrediting to the cause of exposing and halting climate engineering operations. In regard to Earth's reefs, coral reefs, all are dying quickly, as are the even larger former kelp forests. Both of these scenarios grieve me to the marrow. I've spent so much time under the surface of the sea in such locations over so many years in so many parts of the world, and now all but gone. From AP News, fourth mass coral bleaching prompts UN emergency session at Columbia Biodiversity Summit. The United Nations scientists and governments made an urgent call Wednesday for increased funding to protect coral reefs under threat of extinction. Think about this. No acknowledgement of the climate engineering elephant in the sky, destroying the ozone layer, which is bombarding the reefs with extremely intense UV radiation. That's likely the single greatest factor killing the reefs. Of course, the heat is a problem as well, but the thermal energy from the UV buildup is a part of the heat problem also. Let's back up and take a wider view of the horizon, because in the end, that's the bottom line. Exactly how insane is the behavior of our species? Forgive me, I'm going to bypass a few headlines because I want to get to the core of this issue. We all know it's bad out there, very, very bad. But let's look at part of the path that brought us here. Again, how insane is our species, and still is? View this movie, Trinity and Beyond, the nuclear bomb movie, narrated by William Shatner. And if you view that movie, you'll know that something is seriously wrong with our species. Then there's that pesky detail of the 442 nuclear power plants all over the world that are going to go into total meltdown as societal collapse unfolds and accelerates, with the clinically insane at the wheel, unless or until a majority of the population fully awakens and fully applies themselves to the battle at hand, a literal fight for our extremely near-term survival on a rapidly dying planet. Governments are, by definition, state-sponsored crime syndicates. How can so much corruption, deception, and destruction be allowed to metastasize into an ever-expanding cancer for such long spans of time? Because the majority of the population doesn't want to be disturbed by unpleasant and unwanted truths. They want to be pacified by soothing propaganda and blatant lies. The last 100 years has been the ongoing zenith of human insanity. The grand finale is unfolding now at blinding speed. And I fully realize how unpleasant and unpalatable this fact is. I realize that almost none are yet willing to face this reality, but that will change. one way or another. There will very soon be no other option. On that note, some points to ponder. From the UK Guardian, would abandoning false hope help us to tackle the climate crisis? Quote, should we start with stopping climate engineering? That would be the first and most critically important leap we could collectively make in the right direction. If despair is the most unforgivable sin, then hope is surely the most abused virtue. That observation feels particularly opposite as we enter the COP climate conference season, that time of year when the United Nations mega conferences occur, that time of the year when national leaders feel obliged to convince us that the future will be better, despite rapidly growing evidence to the contrary. Yet apparently we must still have hope. It's mandatory. Change is impossible, we're told, without positive thinking and a belief in a better future. That's the message of just about every politician and business leader, and unfortunately far too many in the ranks of the activist communities as well. Of course, we will hear it most loudly in the U.S. presidential election, which is always about which candidate is most faithful to the American dream of endless expansion on a finite planet with finite resources that are rapidly dwindling and imploding. But what if it is hope itself? That's the problem. What if hope is the antidepressant that has been keeping us all comfortably numb when we have every right to be sad, worried, stirred to action, angry, or righteously enraged? New research reveals that people who are experiencing climate-related distress are more likely, not less, to engage in collective action. Again, not less likely, more likely. History, by contrast, shows that manufactured optimism can, and all too often does, lead to complacency and the shirking of responsibilities. There are more constructive, less manipulative types of hope, of course, hope based on common sense and solid science, not the power structure paid for kind. Hope based on actions taken today rather than promised in the distant future. Hope based on keeping our home planet habitable rather than colonizing Mars or waiting for rewards in the afterlife. Hope is at best a motivating belief, a tool, a commodity. It should never be rammed down other people's throats, especially those who are suffering the consequences of the wishful fulfillment of wealthier, faraway consumers. The U.S. is 5% of the global population and uses 25% of the world's resources. Is that equitable? I think not. Forest dwellers are having to cope with a daily reality that increasingly resembles an apocalypse. Promises of help are predicated on even more business as usual. Not surprisingly, many feel they are victims of a confidence trick. Elton Krenak, a Brazilian indigenous intellectual, said native cultures had learned to be distrustful of hopes based on economic development. Krenak said, "When I denounce this kind of end of the world, I'm not renouncing hope. But I also don't want to promote a placebo hope, one where you pat someone on the shoulder and say, everything will be fine. It won't be fine. We're going to get worse first. But after that, we can improve," he states, "as long as we learn to renounce." This indigenous suspicion has deep roots, and not just in Brazil. Hope was weaponized by Christian missionaries promising a better afterlife, then by colonizers offering access to a supposedly superior civilization, then by the capitalist market with a lure of wealth and creature comforts in exchange for land and nature itself. The promise of a better tomorrow is seductive to cultures that put a greater emphasis on contentment today rather than existing at all tomorrow, aka planetary omnicide and near-term human extinction. And to those that think such a conclusion is preposterous and impossible, you won't for long. You can quote me on that. Back to the subject of hope. The Yanomami people who inhabit Brazil's biggest indigenous territory have no word for hope, nor anything like it. They live very much in the present, and their focus is on relationships now, rather than in the future. The views of the future, outlined by the Yanomami's best-known shaman, Davi Kapinawa, portended an end of the world. He has described the climate crisis as, quote, the revenge of nature, yet this has not stopped him from being one of Brazil's strongest advocates for global action on protecting nature and reducing emissions. Climate engineering operations, of course, must also be exposed and halted, or far sooner than almost any dare to imagine, nothing else will matter. The indigenous need to be awakened to this part of the equation as well. Other native cultures in the Arctic Circle in Australia also see a sinister link between hope and colonialism. The politics of hope is about luring us to focus on the promise of the future instead of focusing on the challenges of the present. If you're not alarmed at what is happening to the forests, the oceans, the ice caps, cities, farms, supermarkets, then you're not paying enough attention. That may be due to fear, doubt, or ignorance, or perhaps you're enveloped in that insidious, complacent, long-term form of hope that has been diverting our gaze, giving us pause, slowing action, and normalizing the degradation of our home planet. Essentially, this can be boiled down to the fact that we're leaving our problems to our children. Where is the hope in that? Except that if the human race remains on the current course, our children won't survive any longer than us. And about their children, clearly, they will never be. This is the trajectory we are on. Fostering and feeding false hopes will not alter it. The following is a priceless and timeless nugget of wisdom from Rabindranath Tagore. O poor, unthinking human heart, error will not go away. Logic and reason are slow to penetrate. We cling with both arms to false hope, refusing to believe in the weightiest proofs against it, embracing it with all our strength. In the end, it escapes, ripping our veins and draining our heart's blood until, regaining consciousness, we rush to fall into the snares of delusion all over again. False hope leads exactly nowhere, except whistling in the dark down an ever more apocalyptic road. True hope takes into account the real threats that exist and seeks to navigate the best path through, around, and beyond them. Blind, baseless hope is smoke and mirrors. Real and potentially productive hope resides in reality, reason, and action. Make America great again, we are told. What does that mantra actually mean if one looks through a clear lens at the wider horizon? So, again, I ask, why are we here? Is it even remotely rational to believe that carefully crafted election theater, a theater of the absurd, has any validity? An election theater that has been carefully designed by the manipulators of the matrix to create maximum division and polarization within the population and thus total distraction. Almost none have eyes to see or ears to hear the oncoming train of total collapse, ecological and thus societal. And again, to those that still scream, quote, "It's the economy, stupid," this reply: no, the environment is the economy, stupid. Translation: when nature dies, we will die, a process which is already in the advanced stages of an unimaginably non-linear equation. What's coming when the food shelves empty out? The movie The Road is a potentially accurate portrayal. The saga of early Arctic explorers that began to consume each other when they ran out of food serves as a real-life example. 2 British ships hopelessly locked in the ice pack, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, an appropriately named ship in the end. None survived. Again, I ask, why are we here? The one who plants trees knowing that he will never sit in their shade has at least started to understand the meaning of life. That's a timeless nugget of wisdom from Rabindranath Tagore. A message to those that have done their absolute best to sound the alarm in spite of constant resistance and nonstop denial from family and friends, or perhaps not former friends. There will soon come a time when those with whom you have planted the seeds of awareness will come back to you and ask how it was that you knew catastrophe was coming at blinding speed. Would it not then be appropriate to ask them how it was that you didn't know? The glaring red flags of coming cataclysm were absolutely everywhere. How could they not know? Eyes wide shut. The loot, plunder, pillage, and pollute paradigm was never sustainable, not even close. And now had orchestrated wars of aggression, conquest, and acquisition of lands and resources, all manipulated by those who pull the strings of power, the controllers, the money printers, those who also orchestrate what is occurring in our skies. Same core of power. Yes, the horizon is dim indeed, but we can yet make a difference collectively, only collectively. Again, why are we here? What matters and what doesn't? Time to face the gathering storm head on. Sharing credible data from a credible source is absolutely key. Check the activist suggestions link on the homepage of geoengineeringwatch.org for specific instructions on how you can help to move this fight forward. Please, please, make your voice heard, make every day count. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Until next week, this is Dane Wigington with geoengineeringwatch.org.